Hi everyone, it's Sandra from Parallel Edge. Welcome to our webinar, Feng Shui, your server room. Kevin is just going to go over some items to keep your server room neat and tidy, the benefits of doing so. And with that, I guess that's it. Kevin, you can begin.
Great. We called this Feng Shui for your server room, but really it's all about organization and keeping stuff nice and cool in your server room. A lot of people tend to just cram a lot of stuff, kind of stick it in a closet and forget about it. And really there's no reason to keep your items in a back room where it's all hidden away and closed away, because really when it's organized nicely, it is really a showpiece. So we're just going to go over some things today about defining some of our objectives, which is basically defining what that pore space looks like. What does a bad server room look like? Not necessarily bad, but what's bad for the environment? What's bad for the servers? How could we do it better? Specifying why organization at the beginning is paramount, really organizing that stuff and not just shoving it into a rack or something like that. And also going over examples of how organization can begin. Basically just starting the process of what types of things should you think about prior to beginning to either reorganize your server rack, or if you're moving into a new space, what could that look like? So let's just get started with that. Some server rooms, they're forgotten. Server rooms being in the back room, you can see how dusty and dirty this place is. I came in, I could hardly find exactly where the keyboard or the mouse tray was. You can see how caked up the server is with dust in there. It's basically just a forgotten server. It's in the back room. Nobody moves anything unless it has to be moved, and you can see the amount of dust that has taken up space all over this server. This is scary. So you have lots and lots of wires walking into spaces like this. I can't find out exactly where something begins and where something ends. So if I needed to find out why a certain port on the floor wasn't working or somebody didn't have internet, this would be the first place I'd need to go, but trying to track that port down, it's really going to be tough. So it's taking more of my time, your time, and in most cases, your dollars, trying to figure out where a cable goes from point A to point B, just to find out a simple thing is maybe disconnected or maybe came unplugged. And the complicated, again, trying to figure out where point A to point B goes, but also, is it a phone? Is it a Wi-Fi access point? What's the difference? If all the cables are the same color and they're all going all in different places, it's really tough to track these types of things down. So this is the reasons why we really need to plan for these things at the forefront of these operations and not just thinking about it as a secondary process. It doesn't have to be this way. As long as you figure out exactly where you want to go, maybe, one of the first questions I would ask is, where are you going to be in 5 years type of thing. Now, if you're looking at, increasing the amount of computers that you might have on the floor, you're going to be adding some phones and whatnot, we need to prepare for that now instead of trying to shore it up later on. Why should we organize? First off, it's quick to troubleshoot and get into the sides of the server or a switch. So you can see in this instance, this is a before and after shot. On the left-hand side, I can hardly see the switches behind all those cables. And let's say a switch goes down, which is one of the bigger reasons why a network goes down. Let's say half of your users all of a sudden call us and say, hey, all of our internet's down, we can't reach the server. Some people can, but some people can't. We go out there and we say, oh, it's a bad switch. Well, on the left-hand side, if I were to try to pull that switch out, more than likely I'd be either unplugging stuff that of people that could be working right now, or I'd be having to, kind of try to pull all that cable out just trying to get to the switch, which is really, really tough. If you see how caked up those wires are on the left-hand side, it's going to be really tough to get in there and get that stuff out. Where on the left-hand side, I know exactly what cables are plugged into what port. I simply unplug those ports, I slip it out, I slip a new one in, and really only half the network is down at that time. So again, as long as we organize that stuff at the forefront, or if you hire us to come in and organize those cables, the downtime that you're going to expect on top of the payment that you're going to pay for the switch is going to be much, much lower on the right-hand picture than it would be on the left. Safety concerns, you can see in this picture here, you try to walk in, and this necessarily isn't a server room, but you can see all the power cables. If this was behind a server and I go to try to step behind a server and step on a power cable, I could be shutting off a power switch, I could be unplugging things, I might even be zapped myself. So making sure that not only your network cabling is organized, but also making sure that your power cables are organized. And we'll get into examples of that a little bit later. But again, you want to make sure that those power cables are just as tidy as your network cables, and that comes to prior planning. Exactly where those cables are going to be going, maybe it's to an APC unit that's a battery backup, or maybe just to the wall, or maybe to a power outlet on the side that goes down to an APC. And again, we'll get into more of those things later. But safety is definitely a concern, both for the technician's safety and your safety in case you have to get back there. Heat. Heat is a huge concern when it comes to servers. Those things kick out a ton of heat, especially the more servers you have, the more servers that's going to kick out all that heat. The blade type servers, the ones that go this way and not the tower type servers, they tend to build up a lot more heat because they only have little fans in the front that are blowing through that entire unit and trying to get out the back. The tower units, they blow out just as much heat, but they can have bigger fans. But in both cases, they lead, if you build up heat inside your server, it leads to something called capacitor plague, among other things, but this is one of the biggest things. And a capacitor basically, and not trying to get into too much electrical detail, but a capacitor is basically, it holds up the amount of power before it gets to the thing that it needs power from. So let's say it's a CPU. It's going to be having power come from the wall, go through the motherboard, and then it's going to hit the capacitor first. The capacitor is basically a traffic cop saying, whoa, I don't need that much power, so I'm going to throw it in this capacitor right here before you go onto the CPU. If a capacitor goes down, more than likely your CPU or the device behind that capacitor is getting way too much power, and it eventually starts throwing things like blue screens, and you'll have shorts and other things like that. And just an example of what capacitor plague looks like, these are really great examples of, on the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, you could see they're just starting to bulge. The top of the capacitor is just starting to come up. You can see lines coming through the top of the capacitor right there. That's starting to go. What eventually happens in the middle picture is that the metal inside, or the acid inside, starts to come up through the top and starts leaking over the top. Or on the left-hand side, the left-hand picture, you could see that capacitor is completely blown. It's actually blown the top of the plastic right off the top. And all that extra power is going to be going to those extra devices. And again, it's going to cause blue screens, it's going to shut down your server, and it's really not good for the longevity of your server. So heat is a bad, bad thing. Another thing is longevity of the machines. If we're not in there every day or every week or maybe every month, you should definitely have us come out at least for a 6-month checkup. 6-month checkup, just like your teeth. If you have a tooth that is starting to get a cavity, and you go in 6 months to your dentist and he says, oh, this is kind of small, we just have to do a little filling, you just gone, right? If you don't go every 6 months, maybe you wait a year, maybe you wait 2 years, that cavity is just going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And by the time we get there 2.5, 3 years later, you already have a lot of damage that has happened to the server itself or to the switches themselves. And we could have caught that prior to. And what kind of things can we catch? Things like this: cleaning out fans and intakes. Okay, so if your server's in the back room, if it's in a closet, if it's out where other things are going on, maybe people are spraying some, glue, trying to fit some stuff down on an interiors board or something like that. All that stuff goes into the air, locks up with all that dust, and gets caked up in the fans. So what could we do every 6 months? We could say, hey, why don't you guys have a cookout on a Friday, and we'll shut you down for like an hour, and we'll take the servers out, and we'll blow out all those fans. So we take all that dust and blow it out, everything's brand new. We put the server back in to turn it on, and everything should be good for another 6 months. If something like this happens for 2 or 2.5 years, all of that dust is caked up in that fan. It's building up all of that heat, and again, we get back to that capacitor plague. So it's really important, if we're not out there on a regular basis, to have us come out every 6 months at least and have us look through your servers, look for stuff like this. You know, it may not be a server, it might be a network switch, it might be, you know, some other equipment, maybe some telephone equipment that's in there, and we can definitely take air cans, or even better than an air can, because air cans, if you put them the wrong way, liquid starts coming out of that air can. So just putting up an air can to that may not get everything. Plus, we have the knowledge and the know-how to open up the server, blow out all the fans inside. So it may not be just a fan that's on the back of the server. It might be a fan that's internal inside that server that we can take the sides off, we can take some of the housing out and blow those fans out properly. And we would do that something with like an air pressure machine or something like that. Another reason to organize, you know, if there's no reason to put it in a closet, if it looks nice, it's really a showpiece. With all nice and neat organization and nice and neat wires and wiring and all that type of stuff, there's no reason to put it in a back closet that looks awful and you just want to get rid of it. And the way to do that is doing it with a reputable installer. We have vendors that we work with that I know their work, we know their work, and we know that when they leave and we come in to do the technical part, that it's going to be installed properly. And this is a great example. You know, electricians, when it comes to this stuff, they're not worthy. You know, electrician can run cable. You know, that's about it. They'll run a cable from point A to point B. And I'm not getting down on electricians, but they don't know what we're looking for when it comes to this stuff. So, for example, this vendor that we have by the name of GT Telecom, they do really, really nice work. And you can see on the left-hand side, they know how we work. You know, basically they'll put the patch panels, which is where everything on the floor plugs into, in such a way that we can come in as parallel edge and really capitalize on their work and make an end-to-end solution look really, really nice. So you can see on the right-hand side, that's the work that they do. They come in from the floor, it comes into the back of the patch panel, and you can see everything is nice and neat, everything's Velcroed together, it plugs right into the patch panel, and it's really eye candy from the front to the back. So really, coming in and finding a reputable installer that works with us is definitely key. What does an organized space look like? There's a lot of different things that go into figuring out how organization happens. And really at the forefront, it starts with design. You know, just like an architect, it really starts with the design itself. You're not just going to go in there as an architect and be like, yeah, we'll stick this here, we'll put the kitchen there, we'll put this here, we'll put that there. It doesn't work that way. Really, you have to take a step back and find out, all right, where am I going to be in 5 years? Where is the company going to be in 5 years as far as the company is concerned? And really, how much more equipment are we going to need to put into this rack? Or maybe we need a bigger rack. And then once we figure that out, then we can start to design where the patch panels go, or where the switches go, or where do we need a power conditioner. You know, a power conditioner is basically a rack mountable power strip that also has surge capabilities built in. So we can figure out where we're going to put the power, where we'll put the phone equipment, where we'll put the switches, and really design it from the ground up so that we know once it's finished, you know, it's going to look really nice. Plus, this also helps those reputable installers that we just talked about. So when they come in, they're not going to necessarily have parallel edge breathing down their neck while they're doing the wiring. So they can follow diagrams like this and be like, oh, this has to be a 2U unit. It's 1U down from the top, and all of these U things make sense to the installers because they know where we want their patch panels. They make it look pretty. We come in with our stuff, we slide in the switches, and everybody knows what everybody is doing. So it's really great, a great idea to have really all that design and forethought in place. And these are some good examples of following those diagrams, how it turns out. So you can see from the previous diagram, I followed that soup to nuts as far as where all those switches have to go, where the cabling is hidden in some troughs, and we'll get into the troughs in a second. But really, once you start that design and forethought, it comes to a really nice piece afterwards. Future-proofing, and I touched on this just a second ago. You know, you basically, you're moving into a new space. You want to make sure that the design that you're having right now is going to last for at least 5 years, or even longer, possibly. So you might have a small rack like right now, or you might even have like a server on the floor, and some of your networking equipment maybe on a shelf up top, and then maybe a small rack up top with some patch panels. Okay. You say you're going to be moving into a new space, or you want to really organize this so that it looks better. Well, again, first thing we'll ask is, where do you look like? You know, what's your timeline? What is it going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, something like that, so that we know. You might be looking at another server, you know, a second server. You might be adding an accounting database. You might be adding some more phones or getting a new phone provider. So all of those things we really need to know up front so that we can start to design these diagrams to match and give you the space that you need. So on the front diagram there, you can see there's a lot of space in there, and they maybe started out as a tower server, which is rack mountable. You can just rack mount it on the side. You can see it takes up a little bit more space, but we can work with you with what you have now, and then as servers get added, it just gets enveloped into this organized space, and really just falls in line with everything else. So knowing what those types of things are up front is really good for future proofing. Leaving room for cable troughs. I'm a big proponent of cable troughs because it hides some extra cabling that goes on behind the scenes. Cable troughs is basically just as it says. It's a trough that sits this way. It has some space into the switch or into the rack itself. And then what we do is there's a patch panel, a cable trough, and then a switch. And then I just reverse it. A switch, a cable trough, and a patch panel. And what it does is gives you a nice clean look and hides some of that extra cabling. So for instance, if I had to take port, I don't know, let's say 1 and plug it into port 50, I'm going to be going, you know, a long space from, you know, the upper left-hand corner of your patch panel to the lower right-hand corner of your switch. Now, there might be different reasons for doing that. Maybe a port on the switch went bad, or maybe it's a telephone and it needs to be in a specific port in your switch. So what cable troughs would do, instead of having, you know, a cable just going straight over, and now you have this cable on top of this cable, and this cable has to wrap around this one, and oh, this one's buried way in here. You don't have to do any of that. You just get a nice long cable, and you go from port 1 to port 48, and it hides behind that cable trough all the way over. So cable troughs are really nice. It hides some cabling, unlike where in this previous one, they didn't use any cable troughs. Now, not that this is a bad solution, because you can see how nice and neat these cables look. They're just going from port to port, port to port, port to port. But again, if you're going to be going from, let's say, port 1 to port 48, it kind of blows this diagram a little bit away. So that's why I'm a big proponent of those cable troughs. And you can see even in this diagram here, cable troughing going on. So again, it hides all those cables behind closed doors. And really what it is, it's just a simple trough with a plastic piece on the front. All you have to do is just pull that plastic piece off. You can get to the cables, and then you can go get and hide it again. Color coding. If everything's blue, I don't know what it is, okay? And mostly where we'll walk into a server room, you'll have blue cables, gray cables sometimes, maybe some white cables, but if they're all blue, I don't know what it is. And it really helps to know what's plugged into where and why, especially when it comes to troubleshooting. So the more time we're sitting there and trying to figure out if it's a phone, or maybe you don't have an up-to-date network map on your floor, so you have maybe port 48 used to be in this room, but it's not here anymore, and maybe the patch panel lost its number, you know, whatever it is. If it's not color-coded, it takes us more time. More time equals more money. So if it's color-coded up front, then it's easier to diagnose. So for instance, if you look at this picture here, you can see some blue cabling, some yellow cabling, some purple cabling. Yes, there's purple. I really like that one. The green cabling and some white cabling. So in this diagram, really, I have blue cables on the left-hand side. There are a couple test workstations that I have going. The yellow cabling is all my servers. The purple cabling in the center are for wireless access points. The green cabling are for some phones that are out on the floor, and the white cabling on the right is my uplinks. And I have a diagram that sits on the wall next to the switches that if any person from Parallel Edge comes in, it's really easy to identify. Blue is workstation, you have yellow for your servers, purple for your wireless access points, and so on. You can even see at the bottom of that diagram there, or the picture there, I have red cabling. Those are the don't unplug this cabling, and that's our internet coming in. So we have internet coming from the wall into that unit, which happens to be a telephone unit. That red cable goes up to the sonic wall itself, and that means don't unplug this. So those are your warning ones. So you know, you can take this as much as you need to as far as your cabling is concerned, as what types of devices you might have, what types of you know, color coding you really want. Maybe you don't have phones, maybe there's no IP phones or anything like that. But color coding, again, for that organization piece and slowing down on that troubleshooting is definitely key. Fan back pressure. Sounds like a big word, but basically what this means is if we have all of those wires coming down the back of, yes, and the back of your servers or your cage is just as important. So let's say you have right now no rack. You have a server that's sitting on the floor, and that server is shoved up against a wall. If it's one server, may not make a big deal, but if it's shoved right up against the wall, what will end up happening is the fan's going to blow out heat. It doesn't have enough oomph, to use an easy word there, enough oomph to get that pressure or get all that heat away from the unit as quickly as possible. And what ends up happening is the heat, as high back pressure, it's trying to force its way against the wall. It'll actually get sucked back in to those fans, and it'll regenerate some of that heat. So getting rid of that heat as quickly as possible is really key, especially when it comes to when you have a lot of servers in a rack. And the easiest way to figure that out, stand behind your rack for about 5 minutes, and it's going to feel as hot as it is outside right now. It definitely you know, makes a lot of heat. Now some people put in like some of those big floor fans or something like that to get rid of the heat, and that'll definitely help. But going back to the cabling, that's definitely going to help as well. And some of the things that I put into my designs is not only for cable organization, but also for organization as far as the power goes. So for instance, if you see in that middle picture on the sides of the cage, I'll use a power data unit, which is basically just a long power strip. And it supports a heck of a lot of power right there. And I have that going down one side. I have all my servers that have 2 power ports on it. So you can see in the right-hand side, those servers have redundant power supplies, which means as if a power supply goes bad, it simply just alerts us. We come in, we unplug it, we slide one power supply out, we slide the new power supply back in, plug it back in, and we're all happy again. And the great thing about that with the dual power supplies is that the server never shuts off. What I usually do in my designs is try to make sure that if, let's say, an APC unit goes bad, that there's redundant power in there. And some of the ways we do that, again, is with those PDUs. You can see I have all those power, the secondary power, all the extra power supplies. One goes to one side, one goes to the other side, and everything goes down to the floor. And what that does is it opens up the back of those servers so that all that hot air can get forced out and there's no back pressure on those fans. So back pressure on fans is definitely, you know, if you have it up against the wall, maybe you don't have a cage, kind of pull it out from the wall a little bit. And the same goes for switches. You know, they have little fans on the side sometimes that's trying to blow out this way. And if you have cables that are just hugging that unit, or even if it comes in the front and goes out the back and you have all that hair from all those power cables just coming down the front of those, it's not able to bring fresh air in and blow it out the back. So it's tougher on the fans. Your fans will go. Again, we get back to that heat issue with capacitor plague, whether it be on a server or a network switch. Keeping that server space in mind, you know, it's really tough sometimes when you're trying to design where you want to put your server. If you're an existing space, and let's say you just already have it in a room, it's in a back room, you can't really take any other rooms in the building. But in new spaces, it's really nice that you can design a space with the servers in mind. And the way you would do that is not only trying to design it with a space that's nice and open, but also possibly, if you have the money, keep it with separate air. Okay, so that means that you can keep that room cool or cooler than the rest of the space in mind. Sometimes you can do that with separate air conditioning units. Sometimes you can work with the building to do something like that with separate air intakes and exhausts. So there's different ways you can work that. If you're working in a closet, it's tough. I mean, you already have an existing closet with, you know, some stuff in there. If there's no movement of air in there and it all gets trapped in there, try to crack the door or maybe put a fan in there, especially on hot days like this if it doesn't have separate air. You know, if possible, try to get some cooling in there as much as possible. But if you're organizing a new space, definitely try to design it with that in mind, because you want to make sure that that air is not only being recycled but also cooled, because it can really get up to, you know, 80, 90, sometimes 100 degrees in there, and that's really, really bad for those servers, because now you have servers blowing out 110, 120 degree air. It's going out into a very small closet. It's getting sucked back into the front, heated up again. Now it's coming out at 140 degrees, and it's really going to take a toll on the longevity of those servers. Also, try to keep in mind, what else is that room used for? If that room is sharing space with workspace, people are walking by maybe on a carpet, dust is going to be your biggest thing, because dust will fly through the air. You have dirt granules in the carpet and all that type of stuff, and somebody walks by, kicks up that dust, it gets sucked right into that machine, or even dirt particles. If it's a room that's sharing itself maybe with some extra equipment, nobody goes back there, there's lots of papers stacked up, again, dust is going to be your biggest issue there, as well as making sure that that room is cooled down. So if it's a back room with all kinds of papers, maybe you have the computers that have passed away. I go in sometimes and find, you know, computers that are from 2002, 2003. They don't know what to do with them. You know, they don't recycle them. They just sit back there and take up space. You know, we can get rid of those things and help you find recyclable places for you. But if that room isn't being used at all, then again, not only the dust, but you have all that hot air that's just staying in there. So try to find out exactly what else that room is used for. Again, if it's being used for areas where there's like spray glue or anything like that, that'll get attached to the dust and get sucked into that server. So try to keep that in mind when designing that space. Try to keep it separate from everything else. Try to think about the cooling and also the amount of dust that's going to be in that room. Oh, and another thing, if it is a separate unit, try to keep the filters changed as much as possible. So the air conditioner will actually act as a filter for the room. So if you have it in a separate space, make sure you're changing those filters regularly. Environmental monitoring, okay? This is something new, but definitely if it's in a separate space, there's different things that we can be monitoring behind the scenes that make a big difference to the longevity of that server as well. I've used this company called AV Tech. It's a really teeny tiny box, and you can get it rack mountable. You can see in that lower diagram that I have that rack mountable, but it can be monitoring things that may not be, you know, at the forefront of your thoughts. So we could be monitoring and managing your server. We could be looking for stuff like failed drives, failed fans, and all that type of stuff. But you can take it a step further. Is it too hot in the room? Is it that there's too much humidity? Are there sprinklers in that room that are separate from other things that may go off and you don't even know it? You know, if the server is maybe on a second floor in an attic space and you're on the lower floor, and a sprinkler head goes off and for some reason it starts to pop and it starts spraying water everywhere, you may not know it until it's too late. Now you have all this electrical equipment that's out there and now wet. So things like this not only have the brains to monitor the temperature, for instance. So you can see, as an example, I put in there in the sensor array in that middle diagram. It's 69.12 degrees Fahrenheit. So it'll also take it over a certain amount of time. So I can go in there and find out, oh, on Tuesdays, it's definitely a little hotter in that room. Or you can see in here that on Friday the temperature spiked up to 84. Well, the unit had an issue that day and maybe the building was taking care of that. The other things it can do is monitor for that stuff and do things automatically. So let's say over the weekend an air conditioner goes and it's a closed space. Nobody knows that air conditioning unit went bad. This type of thing has the brains to either to send us an alert, be like, hey, the temperature is going awry in here, something needs to happen, or it can shut down the equipment for you. So let's say it's 85, 86, oh, now it's 90, 95 in there. You know what? We need to shut these servers down. Nobody shut them down yet. This device can shut it down for you. And that would be great for things like water, again, for that sprinkler head. So what you can do is on the top of the rack, there's a rope that goes around the top, and it's constantly monitoring for wetness. Sprinkler head blows, that cord gets wet. It says, hey, there's water here. What do I do? Automatically shut down the servers. And it can get there before the servers get wet to the point where you've had electrical issues. Or water below. Maybe your server room is next to the bathrooms. And all of a sudden the toilet's overflowing and it comes through the wall and starts to fill up from underneath. Well, you have a flood sensor on the floor. Again, shut those servers down for you. Smoke. You could even see it in that picture in the lower portion there, that white thing. So maybe it's not so much you have a fire in there, but maybe one of the servers, maybe it got too much dust in there, a fan caked up. Now all of a sudden there's a little bit of smoke coming out, or possibly a burned out fan unit, or some other things. You never know what kind of things can cause smoke. Again, it can alert us, or it can shut down those servers right away. Humidity is also concerned because if it's too humid in there, it'll act like that spray glue and cake up with more dust and cake up that server. So basically what we would do is use the history, and these units can give you a history of what those sensors are looking at. So you'll see maybe like a graph as far as your temperature goes, or up and downs as far as the humidity goes. Excuse me, and tell us, basically give us a picture of what the humidity looks like in that room, for instance. And if it's too humid in there, maybe we have to buy a dehumidifier or something like that. So it gives us more data, it keeps your equipment running longer, and it's not all that expensive either. Monitoring. It's definitely in your best interest to have Parallel Edge monitor your equipment. People walk by the servers and they see maybe some lights and stuff going on and off. They may not know what it means. Or if the server's in a back closet and people aren't in there daily, or even maybe half, throughout the day, they're not looking for these types of things. And if we're not monitoring and managing your server, these things can last for a long time. And I hate going into environments where I haven't been in there for 6 months, maybe a year, and I come into something like this, because what that means is there's an issue on your server right now. What the issue is, who knows? But these amber lights are telling us there could be a disk failure. It could be a fan failure. It could be some type of a power supply failure or hardware failure of some sort. And the longer these things go, the more damage it causes. And I hate to say it, but I've been in some environments where we've gone in and a disk has failed, and maybe the second disk is failing, and we're really in emergency state right now, and there's not a good backup, and you start sweating and stuff like that, because you're in a really dire situation where if we're managing and monitoring your server, as soon as that disk fails, we're calling you, we're calling Dell, we're finding out what's wrong and what we can do to fix it before it becomes an issue. And it gets back to that cavity, checking in on it every 6 months. Even cavities, can get really, really bad within 6 months. So managing and monitoring that daily, is definitely key. So these amber lights, they mean something to us. They may not mean something to you. But managing and monitoring, if we're not doing it already, please give us a call. It's definitely something you should look into. All right, so this went by a little quickly, but again, there's not a truckload of information there, but just to review some things. You want to make sure that you're designing your environment for not only now, but also for later on. You want to make sure that you're future-proofing your equipment and working with us how to make that situation the best that we can to make your situation with your servers as long as possible. Color coding and cable troughs. Color coding your equipment, it really shortens that time as far as the troubleshooting goes. Cable troughs, it makes things look nice and neat behind the cable troughs so that it looks like eye candy for for anybody who walks through. Making sure you're designing your switches, your server racks, and or your environment from back to front. You not only want to make sure that the front is kind of clean, but you want to also make sure that the back of your switches or back of your rack is clean as well. So you want to make sure that everything is nice and away from your servers, that all that air, that hot air, can blow away from your servers as quickly as possible and not have that back pressure. Keeping your temperature and your environment in mind, making sure that when you put your switches in there, when you put your servers in there, you're keeping in mind how much hot air is coming out the back or out the sides of that equipment, and making sure that as far as the front is concerned, that there's wires that are either open or pushed away so that nice cool air can come in the front, and also making sure that that area is free of other debris. So maybe, again, people walking by, kicking up dust coming in the front, or even possibly some other things that are in the environment like spray glue or humidity or any other things like that. Monitor that environment. If you have an environment that you want us to keep an eye on, that AV Tech equipment that I said, it'll monitor the temperature, it'll monitor for humidity, it'll monitor for all kinds of things in that environment that you may not be able to see, but this equipment can definitely give us that much more information to keep your servers, to keep your switches, to keep your devices working as long as possible. And definitely that last part, you need to have us keep an eye on things. You may not be past those switches or past the servers every day. You may not see those alerts. We can see those alerts if we're remotely managing and monitoring that equipment. We can get the right people out there. We can make sure that that device is back up and running as quickly as possible and make sure that those cavities don't become crevices. If you are interested in having us come out and at least start the process to find out, how we can get your space organized, give us a call, give me a call, give Parallel Edge a call. If it's going to be something that's a huge wiring project, we know the vendors to get in touch with as far as phones, as far as wiring is concerned, and we have tried and true and tested people for those things. Even if it comes to AV equipment, if you're going to be putting in some maybe projectors or TVs, we have people that we work with. We know their work. We know it's clean. We trust them as much as they trust us, and we know who to call. So just like the Ghostbusters, who you're going to call, definitely give us a call at that point. Q&A, if anybody has any questions, I want to make sure to answer them. It doesn't look like anybody's asked anything right now, but if you do have any questions, please feel to chat me up. I'll try to monitor maybe for a second or two just to see if anybody has any. It doesn't look like anybody has any right now. But what you can do is always just give us a call. You can also send us an email. You can send an email to support if you don't know my email address. or if you want to email me directly, I believe my information was in the emails that were sent out. It's just first initial, last name, kcerula@paralleledge.com, and I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions and or trying to get you set up with moving along with your organization.
Kevin, Sandra here. I was wondering if you could go over some of the costs involved in, even if it's just switching out the cables and having a color-coded system in there.
Sure, definitely. Well, the cabling, as far as color coding is concerned, cables are really cheap. So when it comes to your color coding, even just buying 50 purple cables, it's probably going to cost you $30 for the cables. Now, that's where the organization comes into play, because we got to make sure that we organize that space up front. We know what devices we're putting in. So it could be maybe a half day of service, it could be a full day of service, just to figure out what things are going where and then actually doing that work. Now, most people would want that stuff done over a weekend or maybe late on a Friday, because when we do rip out those color-coded cables or the uncolor-coded cables, we're ripping out all those blue cables. You probably don't want to be around when that happens, because your entire network is going to come down. You're going to lose connection to the switches, you'll lose connection to the server, the internet, those types of things. So you might want to schedule that maybe between like 4 and 5, the last hour on a Friday, or maybe even over a weekend. If it happens after hours and over a weekend, it is at an extra charge, because we have to wake those technicians up early on a Saturday to come out and put that equipment in. So that's where your organization comes in. So instead of us having to come out and kind of fly at the seat of our pants trying to figure out what goes where, that organization at the beginning, we figure out what goes where, we design it, we put a Visio diagram together like those white diagrams I showed you before. We know where that stuff goes, so that way when we're on those extra hours over the weekend, with that higher charge, it's just bang, 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 bang. We're unplugging cables, slipping switches in, pulling switches out, plug all that stuff in, and we're in and out of there as quickly as possible.
So it doesn't sound like it's a lengthy process.
It isn't. But like I said, as long as we're doing the equipment and the organization up front, it isn't a lengthy process. If we're doing it just on the fly, it is a little bit longer, because we're trying to figure out what stuff goes where.
Okay. I don't see any other questions.
A couple other things that I just thought of let me see here. Where is that poll? This is a good poll here. So let me launch this now. So just for fire safety, how many of you have a fire extinguisher in your server room? If you have a fire, you want to make sure to get that fire out as soon as possible. Do you have a fire extinguisher or something to fire suppression in there? The bigger your server room, sometimes they even require that it's not just water, but it's actual chemicals that are putting out fires. So if it's not necessarily a spigot or a sprinkler in the ceiling, do you have a fire extinguisher in there? And it looks like so far 80% of you voted, and let's see if we can post this. Let's see. We post this out. Okay, I'm having trouble posting it to the screen, but basically what it says is 80%. Oh, there it is. 80% of you voted. Thank you, Sandra, if you did that. I didn't know how to do that. So I learned something. 80% of you, 100% of you voted, and everybody said no. Let's get a fire extinguisher in there. If you don't have a fire suppression unit, you're concerned with the unit on the ceiling. That may not put a fire out quickly enough, and the quicker the fire's out, the better. So, just getting a fire extinguisher in there is probably a really good idea. Let's see if we have another poll in here. I like this one. Have you ever had a dead rodent or insect in your... I can't tell you how many server rooms I've been in where I found cockroaches on the floor. It's really ridiculous. As far as mice, we see a lot of bad things in server rooms. We even see a lot of bad things under people's desks. But finding a dead rodent, I can't say that I found a dead mouse, but I have found a lot of dead cockroaches in that room. So let's see We have 60% of you voted at this point. Let's see how many said, 60%, 67% of you said yes. So again, the more clean, oh, that's awful. The more clean your server room is, the better it is. So we don't want cockroaches being sucked into fan vents. I got another good reason for us. I don't know if I found one inside a server. That would be gruesome, to find a cockroach inside a server. Let's see what the last poll is here. This is another good one, actually, because this one thing I did not touch on. Can you easily locate the switches and other equipment in your server room? Another thing that's on our checklist that we need to do in server rooms, and I could even be better at doing it too, is identifying what equipment goes where. Do you have everything labeled? So if Sandra is on the phone with you and saying, oh, well, reboot your Sonic wall, and your first question is, what's the Sonic wall? We can do a better job of posting, little post-it notes or not post-it notes, but the labels. Get a label maker. And the next time we're in there, just make sure we're labeling everything. This is an APC unit. This is the Comcast router. This is the Sonic wall. This is switch A, this is switch B, this is switch C. So when we're remotely trying to help, what we can do is easily tell you which things we need you to power off and power back on. You may not need a technician as quickly as possible because you're able to troubleshoot, or we're able to help you troubleshoot those issues. So if we say, one of the switches is, needs to be rebooted. Well, what's it look like? I have 3 different switches. Well, it's a TrendNet switch. Well, they're all TrendNet switches. So if they're all labeled, it's easier to do what we need you to do. Even the servers, have them labeled as well. If it's not labeled server 1, server 2, server 3, or whatever the server's name is, maybe it's like server, AN1 DC. If we're telling you to reboot a server, again, seconds tick by. So you know which one to hold the power button in, wait till it shuts off, and turn it back on. So it looks like about 50% of you is all I see is cables. Definitely give us a call. 50% of you definitely said yes, you have all the things labeled. So that was a nice one to go back to, because again, if it's all labeled, label makers, if it's all labeled up, it's easier for us to help you troubleshoot. So that's a really good poll to find out there. Thank you, Sandra.
You're welcome.
All right.
So we're going to get calls from about 50% of our attendees, it looks like.
Definitely give us a call. Give me a call. I'd be happy to do this. It's one of those stupid things that I have fun with. And once you take a step back and you see all that color-coded goodness, it's really nice to see. So I don't know why I jive on this stuff, but I do.
We can tell, Kevin.
All right, so let me show my screen one more time. All right, so thank you for joining us today. The next webinar is not going to happen until September. There's a ton of people out on vacation, not only at Parallel Edge, but I'm sure out there in the listening world, that are going to be on vacation in August. So we're going to move the next webinar to September, and it's called Crypto Locker and all its cousins. So we'll be going over some of the top viruses that are out there, what to look for if you're infected, what to do if you're infected before even calling us, and really it can help you dollars and cents wise, because every second that virus is doing something on your machine, or possibly scary enough on the server itself, it's definitely better to have preparation before you see these different types of viruses. So we'll be going over some of those things, some of the antivirus that's out there, what they're doing newly to protect us, and what things it could be doing better, and even some other equipment other than just plain antivirus. There's other ones out there like Malwarebytes, or even the Sonic wall itself has stuff built in. And if you're not utilizing that, if it's not licensed right now, there's definitely things to look for. So we'll go over all that stuff next time. Stay tuned in that newsletter. We're sending that out monthly. We have lots of great articles in there, not only by Parallel Edge people, but also people around the world. And look to our website for future webinars. And like I said before, once this closes, please fill out that survey. I want to know how good or bad I was doing today, just to see if I can do a better job in the future. But definitely fill out that survey. Okay.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.
All right, great. Have a great day, everybody.